It's not economic war with Iran. It's war with nations that tolerate sneaky deals that fund Iran's military and keep its economy afloat. And if you thought war with missiles and bombs was hard, this might be harder. The Pentagon prefers boosterism to skepticism, prepackaged videos to briefings. It has now fired the leadership of Stars and Stripes for saying journalism is about independence, not propaganda. The former managing editor of Stars and Stripes joins us. Is this the summer of the food recall? It sure feels like it is, but what do the numbers actually show? Is something amiss at the CDC and the FDA? Dr. Celine Gounder helps us find out. Hello, everyone. I'm Major Garrett in Washington. Let me welcome you to the Takeout. The Trump administration once spoke of destroying Iran militarily. Now it speaks of destroying it economically, conceding, therefore, that the first phase of destruction, though significant, did not topple the regime or force it into meaningful negotiations about any of the topics over which this war was launched in the first place. Iran has survived the bombs and missiles by choking off the Strait of Hormuz and using a kind of rope-a-dope strategy in which the U.S. finds itself now short on munitions and interceptors, such to the degree that is clearly limited in some of its available military options. Coming now, says the U.S., the economic vice, a global constriction of illicit cash flowing through the black market and shadow companies that comprise a sort of global gray market.
Those who stand with the United States will reap the rewards of our partnership. Those who tether themselves to the Iranian regime should expect to share in the isolation of a withering regime.
The U.S. says it knows all, sees all, and therefore can sanction all. In practical terms, this is not so much a threat to Iran as it is a threat to any nation that does shady business with it. Hello, China. There are other nations, and quite officially, the U.S. has now put them on notice.
For decades, this regime has drawn strength from a calculus that regards Iranian retaliation as certain and American enforcement as negotiable. Under President Trump, that era is over. We are going to hold everyone accountable, and this is economic asphyxiation of this regime.
That is big talk. If it works, Iran's regime will implode. If it doesn't, the U.S. will be exposed as incapable militarily and economically of bringing Iran to heel. And if that happens, U.S. credibility in the region will suffer even more than it did after bloody, costly, and ultimately inconclusive wars in Afghanistan and Iraq. So here's the question. It's the fundamental question. Can U.S. economic pressure work? It might, but there are risks.
We are giving everyone the opportunity to remedy bad behavior. Why would I want to blow up the global financial system?
No, the U.S. just wants to blow up the Iranian financial system. And there are cracks. Today, the Iranian currency, the rial, if you can believe it, dropped to 2 million to $1 US. The price of rice in Iran since the war began, up 60%. The price of beef, also since the war began, up 150%. The International Monetary Fund projects Iran's gross domestic product this year will contract by 5%. So, in a manner of speaking, the war is now in the hands of the accountants. We begin with Nancy Cordes at the White House. Nancy, the Treasury Secretary took great pains today to say this is all different. You've seen sanctions before, but this is fundamentally unlike any sanction regime any administration has previously put forth.
Right. He likened it to D-Day, Major, and he said that it would be crippling to Iran's economy. But he didn't give many details that would enable us to gauge just how crippling these sanctions are going to be. For example, he said that President Trump is already working the phones, putting countries on notice, and they've already seen results. But he didn't say what those results were. He didn't say who President Trump is calling. And despite multiple questions from reporters, he wouldn't say which countries might be sanctioned, which entities or businesses within those countries, or how long the countries would have to comply. And so without any of those details, it's difficult to know if, say, China is going to be one of the countries that would be sanctioned. After all, China buys a great deal of its oil from Iran. Does the U.S. have the appetite for another debilitating trade war with China, particularly in an election year? We don't know because Secretary Bessent wouldn't answer that question.
Let's talk about Canada, Nancy, because right now it appears the two nations are entering into a full-fledged trade war. Though the Canadian Prime Minister Mark Carney said today that there was some prospect of maybe reconciliation or some sort of dialogue. Where are we?
Yeah, Prime Minister Carney said he wasn't closing the door on negotiations. He said that when the Americans go to the negotiating table with the right attitude and stop treating us like we are a subsidiary of the United States, we will be happy to talk once again. Contrast that with what the Premier of Ontario was saying. He called President Trump a bully and said Trump can kiss his rear end. But that just gives you a sense of the bitterness today after Carney over the weekend said that Canada was walking away from negotiations and in unusually blunt terms, accusing the United States of basically changing the terms of the negotiation, coming in with last-minute demands that Canada simply can't meet, and treating Canada like a second-rate partner. And so that's the kind of treatment that Carney says he's not interested in. Will these two countries sit down, or will they, as President Trump was threatening today, impose 50% tariffs on one another, something that would be debilitating, obviously, to both countries?
It's a national conversation, and in this political season, it is a conversation in Michigan and in Maine, and how it plays out there may determine the ultimate outcome. Nancy Cordes, thank you so very much. CBS News national security analyst Aaron McLean joins me now. Because you love this program and watch it all the time and see Aaron here, you know he's also host of the School of War podcast. So I tried to lay out the very aggressive talk that came from the Treasury Secretary. And as Nancy pointed out, there are not a lot of specifics, but there's a lot of flexing about, no, this is different. Yeah. This is fundamentally different, and we're going to chase every entity on planet Earth that does shady business with Iran. Is that doable? And would it matter?
Well, let's talk about the messaging as well, which, I'm not sure that D-Day was quite the right comparison here. D-Day, some better part of 100,000 troops land on 5 beaches, wide frontal assault. I was waiting to see what the 2 o'clock announcement would be, given that setup. This administration has a habit of anti-climax when it comes to messaging. On substance, as you said, as Nancy said, it really is too soon to say. There were 60 sanctioned entities, sort of this black and gray market, individuals and entities that people haven't really heard of. But there was all this talk of these conversations are happening at the presidential level, at the Treasury level, warning people. The secretary said that there was going to be a major financial institution likely sanctioned in coming days. Is it possible to cause Iran a lot of pain? Yes, it is, but we'll have to see how far they go.
And there was at least to my ears, Aaron, a kind of 9/11, you're either with us or against us rhetoric to all this. And at one point, the Treasury Secretary said, don't discount our resolve here. The president is all in. Right. And this is not going to be like previous administrations that looked into the abyss of these economic sanctions, heard back from our allies and some of our adversaries and said, no, you'll wreck the global financial system. We're prepared to go to the mattresses, as if I heard the Treasury Secretary correctly.
Well, we have some early returns on that kind of talk already. You saw last week the UAE basically, at least rhetorically, say it was going to comply with this new direction in American policy. There's all kinds of complicated financial dealings between the Gulf countries and Iran, even at this stage in the war. Meanwhile, you had the Chinese Foreign Ministry just come out and criticize this move. So a clear signal from China that they are not excited about this new direction in American policy. And obviously, China is a huge factor in all of this and has real resources of its own to retaliate depending on how tense things get there.
And Aaron, you're very helpful with this program, and I do appreciate it all the time, trying to cut through some of the noise. Over the weekend, the Energy Secretary, Chris Wright, said millions upon millions of gallons of natural gas and oil are moving through the Strait of Hormuz. Is that verifiable?
No, because they won't actually release the details of how they are doing it or essentially show their work. That said, I will say that if the Strait of Hormuz were actually closed, or if we were down to, 1 or 2 million barrels of oil a day, you would expect the price of oil to be higher than it is. And we talked back in March and April about oil at $150 a barrel, oil at $200 a barrel. We're not there. It's high. Right. It's expensive, but it's not there, which suggests
mid to upper 80s.
Upper 80s. It suggests that there's something to it, but there is no way to check their work. They won't show their work.
Interesting. Aaron McClain, always a pleasure, sir. Thank you so very much.
Thank you, sir.
We have new news. We always bring it to you here when we get it. The Supreme Court is allowing President Trump's executive order restricting mail-in voting to continue. It was a split 6-3 decision with all 3 liberal justices dissenting. CBS News legal contributor Jessica Levinson joins me now. Jessica, what did the Supreme Court do, and what effect, if anything, will it have on the upcoming midterm elections?
So 2 great questions. I'll take them separately. The Supreme Court, as you said, Major, is allowing this executive order to move forward while litigation continues. We should emphasize here that the Supreme Court did not rule on the merits of this challenge. This is a procedural ruling, and the question deals really with whether those challenging the president's executive order have the standing to do so, and if they brought the case too soon. That was really the question before the court, whether or not those challenging the executive order were likely to succeed on those procedural arguments. A divided court today is saying that, in fact, the executive order can, again, go into effect while that fighting continues, because they think that the federal government is likely to succeed on their claims that these cases were basically brought too soon. Now, in terms of what's going to happen for the midterm elections, even though the Trump administration can move forward with the executive order, we're going to start voting very soon, Major, as you know. And so it's not clear that the administration will have the time to implement the executive order.
And I'm confused in one level, Jessica, because the executive order tries to create new mechanisms by which mail-in voting can be done. Constitution's very clear. Time, manner, and place is the jurisdiction of states and how they administer their elections. And many states, through a legislative process or an initiative process, have decided their means of conducting mail-in balloting. So why would an executive order supersede what has either happened through initiative or legislation?
This is such a good question. Promise me you'll come back to my election law class and ask it again, and we'll have a lengthy conversation.
I'll take it.
Okay, so as you know, the Constitution says who gets to set the time, place, and manner of elections. It's the states. And then, as you also know, the next sentence is, unless Congress, not the president, unless Congress makes a contrary statute. Now, here we don't have a statute. We have the president issuing an executive order. So with respect to the substance, I do think that there is a real question here as to whether or not the Trump administration is infringing on what is, as a first matter, the state's prerogative. But again, those questions, as meaty and important as they are separate from what's happening today, which is just the Supreme Court saying, basically, we agree with the federal government. The challenges didn't come to us in the right way, and or they're too early, but not ruling on that big, meaty constitutional issue that you just asked me about.
Jessica Levinson, always great stuff. Thank you so very, very much. We're going to move now to the Lindsay Clancy murder trial. Defense attorneys called for a mistrial today. They cited a witness who used the phrase, quote, moral sin. The judge denied that request. Clancy, as you well know, has admitted to killing her 3 children in January of 2023. She has pleaded not guilty to murder charges, arguing she suffered from postpartum psychosis, bipolar disorder, and was over-medicated by her physicians. Our Chanel Call joins me now from outside the courthouse. Chanel, what happened today?
Well, look, Kevin Reddington asked for a mistrial. He said not once but twice during this murder trial, jurors have heard testimony that touched on the topic of religion, specifically Catholicism. This happened last week when prosecutors were questioning Susan Clancy, Patrick Clancy's mother, Lindsay Clancy's former mother-in-law, and then once again today when prosecutors were questioning a medical expert that they brought to the stand as part of their rebuttal. Listen.
I believe it was intentional misconduct. and I feel that the court should grant the motion for mistrial.
How is any of that proper at this point? But it was not. Well, I'm not going to declare a mistrial at this time. What I am going to do is I'm going to bring the jury in. I'm going to tell them to disregard it. I'm going to tell them that's an inappropriate area of inquiry and that this witness's understanding of Catholic dogma or Catholic teaching is irrelevant.
So, Major, just like last week, this testimony, again, that touched on religion for the second time during this trial was struck from the record. So that means jurors have been asked today, they will be asked again when juror instructions come down later on this week, not to include this testimony as part of the evidence that they'll finally look at before deciding whether or not Lindsay Clancy should be held criminally liable.
Chanel, there is the trial going on inside the courtroom. Then there is this public gathering outside, and you have, as I understand it, spent a lot of time with those who have come to this trial for various reasons. Describe what the schedule ahead for the trial is and what your interactions with those who have come to witness it and be part of the conversation has been like.
Well, I think so many of us have been part of the conversation online. I don't know about your feed. My feed has been completely taken over by this trial. And a lot of women that are interested in this issue of maternal health showed up the last couple of days, especially as now we're ramping up to hopefully the end of this murder trial. This morning, there were over 100 people in line waiting to go inside. You know, I spoke to a mother-daughter earlier this week. There were several people who traveled from pretty far away places. There was one person from Maine, another person from Chicago who flew in. So certainly there's a lot of interest. In terms of people's opinions about this, it is pretty divisive. I mean, you have people here who are wearing pink in support of Lindsay Clancy. And then today we saw a new group of people wearing white. They felt that there isn't enough conversation around the 3 Clancy children who were killed. And so they're calling for justice for those children. They were wearing white to represent purity and innocence.
And the schedule ahead, best as we know it, Chanel?
Right. So everything sort of paused after that mistrial motion was put into place. The judge obviously denied that motion, but he excused jurors for the rest of the day for today. Tomorrow we'll start back at 9 a.m. There's one more witness on the docket that prosecutors are going to call, another medical expert as part of their rebuttal strategy here. Before finally this comes to a close, we'll hear closing arguments probably on Wednesday before jurors begin their deliberations.
Chanel Call, thank you very, very much. And a quick programming note, CBS News 24/7 will have full live coverage of those closing arguments in the Lindsay Clancy murder trial, as well as trial updates every half hour. Eric Slavin, the fired editor-in-chief of the military newspaper Stars and Stripes, joins me next. He says an interview that appeared on CBS Sunday Morning cost him his job. Also, nearly 25 years after the 9/11 terrorist attacks, a victim's DNA has been identified, the new technology that led to this bittersweet breakthrough. Plus, a sailor serving for months on the USS Abraham Lincoln says immigration officials have detained his father. What we know about this ICE arrest. The Takeout returns in 90 seconds. Welcome back to the Takeout. Welcome to the Conversation Corner. We took note of this last week. A number of people at senior leadership positions were fired from Stars and Stripes, its newspaper. The publisher, editor-in-chief, and a Middle East reporter all terminated by the Pentagon because of insubordination. A Defense Department spokesman declined to comment, but former editor-in-chief Eric Slavin says he was removed in part because of an interview he gave CBS Sunday Morning about censorship. Listen.
Do you have red lines in your mind?
Yes, I do.
Give me a red line.
Well, don't run a perfectly accurate story. Run this instead. Here it is, written by the Pentagon. That would be a red line.
Eric Slavin joins me now. Eric, I'm sorry this happened.
Thank you.
Would you ever take this job back?
Well, you know, that's a hard thing to say. I received the
notice of separation on Friday, and it was very unexpected. I woke up that morning and I started editing a story by Lara Cordy about U.S. naval family evacuees from Bahrain who have been waiting in limbo for the past 6 months for what the move is next. And then suddenly you've been separated for insubordination. So it was a real shock.
And do you believe, Eric, that your declaration to David Martin that what constitutes editorial independence was perceived by senior Pentagon leadership as an act of insubordination?
Well, I can only tell you what was in the document that they sent me, and it was specified as a charge, and it quoted me verbatim what you just saw on your screen. I gave a hypothetical response in my personal opinion as to what would be my red line, and I described censorship, which I believe to be in line with Department of Defense regulations and the law itself.
What does the Stars and Stripes do, and how did you understand your editorial leadership of it to make sure it could do the thing that it strives to do?
Stars and Stripes has a long, long history of independence. It traces its roots to the Civil War, but really the modern incarnation of it occurred during World War II. And General Dwight Eisenhower at the time was very specific. He said, hands off. This is the soldier's paper. Do not interfere. And so that is the spirit by which Stars and Stripes has operated for many decades. And I would never have thought that I would have been in this position.
Because soldiers, all military personnel, know that sometimes things go wrong, sometimes conditions are imperfect, and there's nothing seditious about explaining that or reporting that. They actually know through their military experience that when things are surfaced, sometimes things change for the better.
They hold us accountable every day. If we get something that doesn't correspond with their lived experience, they call us out on it real fast. Yeah. So we make sure that we're giving them the straight truth, that we are accurate, that we are as objective as humanly possible. And we never think really in terms of positive and negative, but I can certainly see why maybe the Pentagon would. But we don't shy away from that. We look for what's new, different, interesting, and relevant to service members.
Is there a larger trajectory here, Eric? And I ask because this leadership at the Pentagon went through a period of time where it exerted tremendous energy on removing people from the press room, bringing in people who were perceived to be more boosterish in their coverage of the Pentagon. It conducts far fewer briefings numerically, even though we are in a kinetic war. It provides prepackaged videos without any commentary or questioning of outside independent journalists. And now, what can only be described as a full-on assault at the editorial leadership of the Stars and Stripes. What is this larger picture?
Well, it's very concerning. We're at a moment in the world where we have conflict in Iran, Ukraine, hotspots in the Asia Pacific. There's a real need for information about what the U.S. military is doing. And there used to be a time, like you said, where in the Pentagon, it was very simple for military officials to talk with journalists very frankly, sometimes on the record, sometimes on background, sometimes on the record. And I think it contributed to the nation's knowledge of what the U.S. military was doing, and I fear that we're losing that.
After these firings, the Navy Captain William Urban, who was tapped to serve as the deputy publisher, wrote that he, quote, received multiple assurances that the Office of the Secretary of War was committed to the editorial independence of Stars and Stripes. How do you interpret that?
Well, I can't speak to any conversations that he had. All I can say is, looking from the start, in January 15th, when a tweet was put out with zero warning regarding our operations, and a leak to a friendly outfit said that a whole bunch of our reporters were going to be fired and replaced with military members. How am I supposed to take that into account and square that with what's just been said? I'm not sure.
Right. It feels as if this once independent entity is losing that.
I certainly hope it can remain independent in some way. I haven't given up on that, but time will tell, and I think there needs to be a reckoning.
As is often said in Washington, on that score, the arrow is pointing downward. Eric Slavin, I appreciate your time very much. Thank you.
Thank you.
Coming up, how much responsibility does the FDA or CDC bear for the recent spate of food recalls? Its former commissioner seems to think, well, not so much. Our Dr. Celine Gounder joins me next to discuss all of that. You're watching The Takeout. Welcome back to The Takeout. So very good to have you with us. Here is a look at what else we and now you are watching this evening. Almost 25 years since the September 11th terrorist attacks, another victim has been identified. It took a very long time, but New York officials used a new genetic genealogy technique to decipher the identity of an adult woman victim there. Her family has declined to publicly name her. New York is still, believe it or not, trying to work through the process of formally identifying more than 1,000 remains. Joshua Uvilis, a sailor aboard the USS Abraham Lincoln, says immigration officials arrested his father. The Department of Homeland Security has confirmed that arrest and says Uvilis' father entered the U.S. illegally and was detained during a traffic stop. The Uvilis family says the father lacks a criminal record, and DHS agrees. Uvilis has been on the Lincoln for more than 9 months. The aircraft carrier is on its way home after widespread reports of poor conditions aboard and mental health issues among some of its crew members. Now, it feels like there's been a new food recall every summer this week. That's not the actual tempo, but that's what it feels like. Even so, former FDA Commissioner Scott Gottlieb says the numbers this summer pretty much on par with what we have seen in recent years. Here is what he told Face the Nation yesterday about using recalls to measure whether the government's being effective in this space or not.
I wouldn't point to recalls as a measure of whether they're doing a good job or not doing a good job. Recalls really don't comport with whether or not the overall program is effective. And I don't think the program is not being effective. I think if you look at this year, there haven't been more outbreaks than what we traditionally see, with the exception of that cyclospora outbreak, which was an extraordinary outbreak, and I think points to real problems with produce that we were sourcing from portions of Mexico where you can't send in inspectors. I think FDA has done a reasonable job this year getting on top of these outbreaks when they've been identified by CDC.
So I want to bring in CBS News medical correspondent Dr. Celine Gounder on this. So we love to dig in deeper on these things and get to some of the nitty-gritty. So first question, Dr. Gounder, is it even helpful summer to summer, season to season, to count recalls in the first place?
Recalls require you having traced an infection back to the source, back to a specific food. And so we also know that there are instances where you have foodborne disease outbreaks where a food is never identified. In fact, this is the case in about 40%, almost half of all the different outbreaks that the FDA tries to investigate. So if you don't figure out what the food is, you can't recall the food. And unfortunately, it means it stays on shelves or in the grocery store, still getting people sick.
Has this summer been numerically worse than previous summers?
Cyclospora outbreak really was unprecedented in terms of size. In terms of number of outbreaks, individual outbreaks, we're probably around the same level as we typically see. But that said, the cyclospora outbreak is very concerning for a number of different reasons. Dr. Gottlieb alluded to inspections of foreign food producers. Those numbers are down by almost 30% in the past year. There's also been a cut to FDA quality checks for food labs, and CDC's parasite surveillance staff has been cut by about 70% in the past year. Much of this is related to the cuts to public health funding to both the FDA and CDC.
Here's another specific term I'm not sure my audience knows, but I think if they care about this subject, ought to know. What is the food traceability rule, and why does it matter in this conversation?
So this is a rule that was supposed to go into effect in January. And this would require food producers to track lot by lot foods that are high risk for foodborne disease outbreaks. So that would make it much easier to figure out, okay, such and such patient ate these foods. Can we trace back and see if there's a link? Without that food traceability rule, the food producers and distributors are not required to keep such detailed records. Now, it was right around the time that the FDA or the Trump administration decided to delay the implementation of that rule that Taylor Farms, the parent company of the iceberg lettuce involved in the Cyclospora outbreak, that parent company gave a $1 million donation to a pro-Trump super PAC. This is in FEC records. We don't know if there is a link, but it is certainly concerning this happened right around the same time.
And Dr. Gounder, how does this all fit into the broader question of how much do we inspect, how often do we inspect, and how many inspectors do we have?
We don't have nearly enough inspectors. About 1 in 5 inspector jobs remained vacant in the past year. So we certainly need to be hiring more, having them do more frequent visits. The most recent outbreak involving alfalfa sprouts with salmonella and E. coli contamination. There was a known roof leak on top of the sprouts. The company was warned about this, and the FDA was unable to come back to re-inspect before people were already hospitalized from this most recent outbreak.
That's a classic example of not being there for phase 2 of whatever you started as an inspector in phase 1. Dr. Gounder, thank you so much for your time and your expertise. Coming up, a retired U.S. Army officer discusses his new book that chronicles 20, count them, 20 near-death experiences and what he learned about war in that process. That's next, right here on The Takeout. Welcome back to The Takeout. Welcome back to the Conversation Corner. And yes, the new chairs are very, very comfortable. Retired U.S. Army Major and urban warfare expert John Spencer sharing life lessons he learned from his many near-death experiences in a new book titled 20 Times I Almost Died, Life Lessons from the Edge of Survival. And John joins me now, is also the current co-director of the Urban Warfare Project. And let me emphasize, you are a major, an actual legit major, as opposed to a major in name only, which is what I've always been for 64 years. By the way, it's my birthday, so 64 years exactly today. Oh, wow. John, it's great to have you here. So 20, does one stand out more than another, or are 20 near-life death experiences pretty much the same?
No, none of them are the same.
Okay.
They're all either vastly different locations around the world or vastly different near deaths. Some are.
Are there any common denominators? I mean, obviously there's risk and peril, but anything else?
No, I think it's just me. And I believe that no man has stepped in the same river twice. The man nor the river are the same. Right. So each one of these, I'm a different person. I either take a lot from them or not, and I try to make the lesson from each one of the experiences.
If a civilian is listening to you and say, well, look, I've never had a near-death experience of any kind, how could I relate to this book?
Yeah, I hope they relate a lot to it, because the whole point is to live your life by a code. These are stories in which my character was either developed or tested. So at the end of it is really a code I developed for my kids in my now civilian world.
Walk me through that code. That fascinates me.
So I actually struggled explaining to my daughters about being strong because her mom was deployed in the war. So I developed this code, which is an acronym because I'm a military guy, right, about being strong and what that means in our today and for them every day, about being mentally and physically fit, about respect is given and it's earned, it's never demanded. Each one of the letters of strong has a variable of what does that mean? And we use it a lot in my family to say, look, that's not who we are. We don't lie, we don't cheat, we don't steal. Kind of some of the golden rules are in there, but they're all actually developed through all these experiences I've had in and out of my military career.
How did the first of these near-death experiences influence all the rest? Because that has to be the one that you remember obviously the one you remember the longest.
Again, picking which story is my favorite almost, or the very first one, I actually, as a 17-year-old boy, joined the military and get shipped to Panama, which is a culture shock from a small town of Indiana into the jungles of Panama. And I get attacked by African killer bees in my whole face. And we end up getting lost in the jungle. That's where really things start to become real, and you get put to the test of, okay, now what are you going to do? And
you're disoriented, you're in tremendous pain.
Yep.
and you're not exactly sure what you are or can do next.
Right. So I get the chance to say, well, quitting is not an option here, which is a real theme of the book, is that not quitting, or quitting is not an option, but it doesn't mean you don't change direction. You don't take a step back. In that instance, I had to keep moving forward, and it ended up being a whole day of running out of water, all of this, but not quitting was what got me through it. And I just took another step until we found the point where everybody else was.
I am not a military history buff, because if you say you are, you really have got to have read lots and lots and lots of books, but I'm interested. And one of the things that is a recurrent theme in that space is the American soldier, historically, has been credited with a couple of things: adaptability and ingenuity. Lots of other militaries are more disciplined. They sometimes have better training, some other things. But one of the added values of the American soldier, sailor, airman, Marine, adaptability, ingenuity. Important?
Absolutely. I actually did that research, and I taught strategy at West Point. So absolutely, that's there. And the age-old question is, why do we fight? Is always in military history. Why do American soldiers fight? And they fight for the people to the left and right of them. But one of the questions I used to ask military formations that I was in charge of is like, who are we? And a lot of times we are Americans. And that comes with that can-do, which is that innovation.
And some of it's ignoring rules or changing rules on the fly.
Yep, absolutely.
And having the freedom and agency to do that.
Absolutely. Which is, you're right. As I travel the world to all these other militaries that I study and see how they had success or not, that variable is an American trait. That American trait of not only can do, but I'm going to do it this way.
I'm going to do it this way.
Yeah.
And I'll see you at the top.
That's right.
John Spencer, it's been a pleasure.
Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. I appreciate it. Coming up, an unlikely meeting, that's putting it mildly, between Jared Kushner and Hakeem Jeffries. Can we gain any insight into what that was about, and what does it say or not say about the midterms and Republican prospects? Our political panel has much to say, and they will when we come back. This is The Takeout. Welcome back to The Takeout. It's Monday, which means it's Takeout Tavern time. I want to bring in our political panel. Joel Payne, CBS News political contributor, Democratic strategist. Todd Ricketts, in from Chicago, co-founder of the news search engine FreeSpoke. Also the former finance chair of the Republican National Committee and co-owner of the 2016 world champion Chicago Cubs. I'm a Padres fan, so, you know. Remember, kids, I always keep it with coffee. Got to keep my wits about me. All right. New York Times reported something that I did not expect to see. Hakeem Jeffries meeting privately with Jared Kushner. This is problematic for both sides. Democrats do not like to see Hakeem Jeffries dealing with Jared Kushner, and Republicans wonder, why is Jared Kushner a clear emissary of the White House pre-talking to someone who could be the next Speaker of the House? Todd, your thoughts?
You know, well, I mean, my first thought is that I'm sure those guys know each other pretty well, so it's not unusual for them to be talking. It's kind of unusual for them to be meeting in person at this moment. But I think it's good. I think, excuse me, one of the things is that we've lacked for the last few years is Republicans and Democrats talking to each other. And I'm sure that, like, the topic they were talking about is if you know, Hakeem does ride into the speakership on a wave of, like, DSA candidates, like, how are they going to keep Congress from impeaching the president every other day?
Right. How are you interpreting this, Joel? And how do you think it's going down within Democratic circle?
Listen, I worked in Congress. I get why Hakeem Jeffries would want to meet with Jared Kushner. It makes all the sense in the world. I do think there is a political messaging challenge that the leader is having here, which is why 70 days before an election where you are looking to demonstrate real accountability for this White House, are you looking right now to make deals or make conversation with this White House in this moment? If you want to do that in the lame duck in November and December, that makes a lot more sense. Right. Doing it right now, I think it raises some unhelpful questions about Hakeem Jeffries at a time where he doesn't.
And as we both know, and feel free to jump in on this, gentlemen, there are lots of ways to communicate in Washington in political circles, separate from a private meeting. You can text, you can have friends via back channel. There are lots of ways to sort of suss things out that is different than this, because both parties had to know it would get out, and there would have to be explanations once it did get out. Your thoughts?
I think there are a couple of New Yorkers. I don't think it's unusual for two guys who live in New York, who've lived in New York their whole lives, to get together in person. So I think that's like a little bit less of the issue. I understand what Joel's saying, but I think there's a geographic aspect of where they've lived. They're right by each other. That they've known each other forever.
One thing is for sure, it is much more helpful for the public to know that Jared Kushner is meeting with Hakeem Jeffries than for the public to know that Hakeem Jeffries is meeting with Jared Kushner. In other words, it is less politically caustic for Kushner to take that meeting than Jeffries to take that meeting, which tells me, I think, where the sourcing for that meeting probably came from.
All right, we're in a situation with Canada right now.
Yeah.
It may not last, but right now it looks pretty serious. Daggers kind of drawn over trade issues. And Mike Pence was on CNN over the weekend and had some thoughts. Listen.
American businesses and American consumers pay American tariffs. And I think the last thing we need right now, as our economy is getting back on its feet, is a trade war with Canada. My hope is, for the sake of American families and for the sake of the American economy, that what we're looking at here is negotiation.
I was in New York this morning. I did the morning show and talked to Ted Cruz about issues related to News of the Day and his book about Clarence Thomas. And I asked him about this. He said, I'm all for using tariffs for leverage. Yeah. That's exactly where Mike Pence is. Leverage, but not permanent trade war hostilities. A lot of Republicans are hoping this is leverage that works itself out in the very near term.
Well, I would say that it has to, because Canada doesn't have any other choices. You know, I heard Prime Minister Carney talking about putting tariffs on crude oil, on natural gas, those things. The problem Canada has is they don't have another outlet. The environmental movement,
meaning another trading partner.
Yeah, the environmental movement in Canada for years has blocked any sort of a pipeline to the coast. So they don't have the infrastructure to sell that crude or that natural gas to anybody else. And really,
meaning they have to sell it to the lower 48.
That we are their only option. But also, I would say Canada has been protecting its markets for years, really since World War II. I mean, a lot of the world has been. And I think the president has rightly said, like, it's time to get a reset on trade with everybody, including Canada. And if you look at, like, you know, after World War II, we set up these one-sided trade deals to allow the economy of the world to grow.
To rebound.
And then we got NAFTA, which kind of took some of that manufacturing. And all these small cities in the United States, they were promised high-tech service jobs to replace.
Particularly in the industrial Midwest.
Bottom line, Canada is the 1, 2, or 3 trade partner for a couple of states, Maine
and
Michigan being among them.
How it plays out there.
And politically, for Trump and for Republicans to take this risk right now, I just think, if you're a Republican who's on the ballot, you do kind of have to wonder.
If you're Troy Jackson, do you run right into this? And if you're Abdul El Sayed, do you run right into it?
You have to wonder, if you're a Republican on the ballot, is the president, does he actually care about holding on to his majority? Because these are the types of things that he's doing, and it's not just this, but it's others that are just going to cause problems for Republicans.
And the curious thing, Todd, was earlier last week, the president said we have a deal, more or less.
Yeah, I think they were close until they got to the final details. I obviously wasn't part of it, but it seemed like they were close and then fell apart at the end.
How do you assess this midterm environment as someone who has worked in the higher ranks of the RNC and has sort of watched things play out as they're coming at you?
Yeah, I mean, anymore, every election is competitive in this country, and midterms are, you know, generally tough for the incumbent party, and I don't think that's any different. But, you know, you got
the question then, Joel, is it more harsh than a typical midterm?
I know it's going to be more harsh than what's coming behind you.
Whoa, look at that. Look at that. 64, what's that about? Oh, yeah, Paul McCartney wrote a song actually about my birthday.
Tell me the midterms I've worked.
Yeah, there we go. Joel Payne, Todd Ricketts, great to have you here.
Happy birthday.
Drink up, gentlemen.
Happy birthday.
Quick reminder, The Takeout is available as a podcast on Apple, Spotify, YouTube, and everywhere else. You can find each show there and our long-form interviews, of which we do many. Happy Monday, everyone. It's my birthday. This is The Takeout. Relentlessly curious, reliably civil, occasionally clever. The Daily Report coming up next. There they go. Bye-bye.